Hey everyone, welcome to the Career Journey podcast. Today's episode features Dr. Eric Landrum, a cognitive psychologist and professor at Boise State University. And Eric was quintessential in this podcast in that he gave me a lot of advice about how to get started. He has his own successful podcast called Psych Sessions, and he gave me advice everywhere from the technology to use, the servers to use, ideas and how to generate ideas and topics, and really just helped get this podcast off the ground. And so you'll hear a little bit about that. And then he'll explore his own career journey from graduate school to becoming a professor to moving away from his family, all the way to starting his own successful podcast. And at the end, he gives some really great advice about networking, specifically networking while introverted. And so this was just a joy to record. And be sure to check out his podcast, Psych Sessions. It's all about psychology and teaching and fun stuff. And please enjoy Eric Landrum. Hey everyone, welcome to the Career Journey podcast, where we explore exciting careers and how to get them from the people who've lived it. I'm your host, Brittany Avila. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy. All right. Well, hi, Eric. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, Brittany, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. So Eric gave me all of the advice I needed to start this podcast. So thank you for that. You really helped get it off the ground.
Well, Brittany, so a couple things. First off, you took the ball and you ran with it, so you should take all the credit. And also, as we were talking about a minute ago, it's really impressive what you've done in terms of from having the idea and then finding a platform and getting a logo designed and launching everything. And so, kudos to you, because a lot of people, I think, have the idea, hey, I want to start a podcast, or I want to start a blog, or I want to do this new extra thing that's not part of my job. And a lot of people have a lot of really awesome, great ideas, but they don't ever follow through, which is okay, but it's even more awesome when they do. So congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So we like to start on this podcast of just at the very beginning. So did you have any idea of what you wanted to be when you were a child?
Oh, heavens, no. No, not at all. I mean, and so, I was a product of the 60s. And so, I was a kid that got up in the morning, and if it was the summer and I wasn't going to school, I'd go outside and play.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, no cell phones, suburban neighborhood, first off, a lot of privilege, a lot of white privilege. So let me acknowledge that. And so I'd go out the door and ride my bike and play with my friends on the street. So I got older, I played baseball, played basketball a lot. So I had no idea.
Did you think about it at all, or did you have the normal, I want to be a baseball player or anything like that?
I think I knew enough to know that I wasn't good enough to be a professional athlete. I just enjoyed I think I enjoyed the camaraderie of being around other people. And I don't remember having the idea that I want to be a firefighter or a police officer, kind of the stereotypical. And I don't remember also having I want to be a doctor or a lawyer. I just, when I think about it, I don't remember having thoughts about occupations.
That's good. That makes for a good childhood.
It was pretty carefree and pretty innocuous. And I think as we have this conversation in 2020, I think we realize that a lot of childhoods around the United States do not have that freedom of responsibility. I don't know if that's a product of my parents shielding me or me just being pretty inept at paying attention to it. I'm not really quite sure what that was. So
maybe a combination of both.
Yeah, and probably and a lot of other things that a developmental psychologist or a therapist would help me figure out. Yeah,
Right.
seriously, yeah.
So when was the first time you do remember thinking about what you wanted to do? Was it high school, college?
Probably, this is going to be scary. Probably graduate school.
Mhm.
I in college, I figured out, or maybe high school even. I figured out I was relatively good at school, and that tended to get relatively good attention from teachers, which felt good. And so in college, I did. I double majored in college. I was a psychology major. I was also a speech communication theater arts major. And I went through a bunch of majors, by the way. So I went to college as a math major. And so I
Mhm.
swapped around a couple different times. Um, and actually, psychology was the last major that I settled on, and with the double major. And I, I don't even remember thinking about an occupation until after I got to graduate school and figured I'm going to come to the end of the line of going to school, and I'm going to run out. And I don't think it was a purposeful delaying tactic, but it was just I really enjoyed going to school, and I'd gotten pretty good at it. And so, but what do I do next? Well, the thing I'd heard of and seen is that you can stay in school forever if you become a college professor. And, you and I, as going to graduate school, about 30 years apart, by the way, we watched these, for the most part, really cool role models around us have a life of the mind and thinking about ideas and working with young people and supervising theses and dissertations and taking their own ideas and taking them out for a spin. And although it looked like hard work and they complained about long hours and they complained about low income, it still looked pretty good. And so I've listened to some of the podcasts and of yours, and I wish I could say it was really thoughtful and I had a plan and I mapped it out and I've got a yellowed pad that shows you all my steps. I didn't do any of that.
I kind of laughed because I had a very similar story. I went to school because I was good at it and I liked it, all I wanted to do. And eventually I knew that I was coming to the end of the line, and mine was a little earlier. Mine was in undergrad, and I realized, oh, I need something to do after this. And I was like, oh, if I become a professor, I can just stay here forever.
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't really think about business and industry, and the PhD is, or the doctorate is, as people understand in higher ed, that's a big Swiss Army knife. There's lots of skills and abilities in there, and a lot of our colleagues do end up directly or indirectly in business and industry, corporate, non-governmental, non-for-profit places, because there's an amazing skill set that's there. It's a Swiss Army knife with a lot of deluxe features. Um, so I did have other options. I just didn't take them seriously. I it was the path of least resistance, and I don't necessarily think that's a good decision making process. It worked out for me. It worked out for, I think, thousands of our colleagues around the country, but that doesn't mean that it's a good way to make a decision about one's future.
Yeah. Do you mind if we go back a little? Because I love that you mentioned you
Whatever.
majored in a lot of different things before settling on psychology. Can you walk us through that process? How
Sure.
you
Yeah.
transitioned out of math?
Yeah. So I did. I liked math. I was pretty good at math. I thought. I went to college as a math major. I took Calc 1 and Calc 2, my first two semesters at college. I got a C plus in both. And I decided I got a C plus in Calc 1 and Calc 2. Maybe being a math major is not really for me. And so I changed my major to business and I took accounting 1 and I hated it. I mean, 2-column accounting with debits and credits. Thank goodness in this world we have people who are accountants and mathematicians, by the way, because we need them in this world. But I'm trying to be politically correct. I hated accounting, not accountants and not accountancy professors. But this 2-column thing, I just wanted to poke my eyes out all the time. And so then I did speech communication and theater arts, and that was my first love. And I had been in plays in high school and loved it. And so I kept that one as a major. And then then I picked up psychology by the end of my freshman year. And I kept those last two as a double major throughout my undergraduate years. So.
And what made you decide to do the double major instead of just one?
Again, you're asking really good questions that an old man can't remember that far back as to the rationale. Actually, I went to a small private liberal arts school. At the time, Monmouth College in Monmouth, Illinois had 640 students total at the time. So we knew everybody. We all ate in the same cafeteria for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. If something happened the night before on campus, we all knew it by the next afternoon because we had that kind. And there were no cell phones. There was no Twitter. There was no Facebook. But I can tell you probably the primary reason why I kept those last two majors were the faculty. There were 3 faculty members in each of those 2 departments, and they were each, those 6 faculty members were just amazing. They were role models to me. They were inspirational. I saw them, and I saw things in each of them that I wanted to aspire to as an adult. And I was 18 years old when I went to college, and so I had a ton of growing up to do, and I needed to do it there. And I guarantee that's the reason why. And it's not because the accountancy and business and the math faculty weren't. That was more about my lack of ability to perform on the subject matter. It wasn't about the people, but the inspirational people in those departments just helped me want to do better. And plus I had some intrinsic interest in the topics.
And so you said you found kind of teaching, being a professor in graduate school. What prompted you to go to graduate school in the first place?
Undergrad was the end of the line. I liked school. I liked going to school. I heard about graduate school. Our department at Monmouth had invited people from different places. One of the places was Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. A faculty member had come and given a talk, so there was a connection. So I applied to 5 different places, 5 different graduate schools. One of them was Carbondale, and I ended up getting accepted there. And so, Brittany, it's really funny because you're expecting a logical story with, logic and thought and planning, and it bless you for trying to find a thread that makes sense. But the more I think about it, I just wanted to keep doing what I was doing. And maybe it was about, I wasn't ready to make a decision. So the decision was keep going to school.
Honestly, I love that there's no logical kind of thread for you, because it's, I think, not what people expect. I think everybody kind of assumes that each person knows exactly what they want to do. And so it's nice to hear a different story.
Yeah, I'm still in school. I mean, I just finished year 29 at Boise State, year 32 altogether. I'm still in school.
So you go to graduate school and then you start to realize you want to be a professor. How did you figure out exactly what your next steps were, or what you needed to do?
Well, the great thing there is that you're part of a lab where there are people older than you. They've been there longer, and then you get to know other people in other labs. And so you hang out, you spend inordinate amounts of time at graduate school, you're in labs, and so you hear stories, and you get mentored not only by your thesis and dissertation supervisor, but also by more senior members of of the lab. And that's how you start to figure it out. You start to watch them. They go on job interviews. They come back and they tell you what went well, what didn't go well. Some years they got jobs and left. Some years they didn't get a job, and they would be back in the lab another year if they had funding. And so there was this natural mentoring process that you just kind of paid attention. Also, you would watch the department at SIU Carbondale. They would be hiring. So they might have an opening for a developmental psychologist or a social psychologist, and they would bring in applicants as part of their job interview process. And so grad students would often be invited to, as well as undergrads, to go to those. And so I went to a lot of job talks. In fact, I think there's one or two faculty members still at Carbondale who I went to their job talks. And I know at some places now in the country, departments actually invite graduate students to be on the committees, the hiring committees for faculty searches, which I think is a really good idea. And so I think that's how I kind of figured out the process of what was going on and what would I need to do in my future. What was the next transition point from, you do high school to college, college to graduate school. Now you got to get ready for the next transition, grad school to the job market.
And so what did that transition look like? How did you find a job or think about finding a job, or what was it?
That's a great question. Back in the olden days, again, no internet, no Facebook, no Twitter. And so it was all newspaper ads. And so you'd go to APA Monitor. Right about my time, APS was just coming out. And back then, it was the American Psychological Society. It was an Association for Psychological Science, and it was the ads in the back of the APA Monitor was the place to go to find the best collection of job ads, and you would just get that every month, and that'd be the place. There were also specialty places like Division II, I think probably had something in the back of their newsletter, but you would just scan for those. And plus some people had insider information, from alumni or from their undergraduate department if they were advertising, things like that. Also, if you were connected with regional conventions the year before, like an MPA or an EPA or an RMPA, you might know of things going on. But again, back then, back in the olden days, it was all paper and telephone, and it was a little bit more networking and insider stuff than it is today. I think it's much more open and fair and democratic, small d, these days than it was back then.
Well, and easier. You can sign up for listservs now, and they just send you the jobs to your email inbox.
Yeah, I think getting the job is as complicated or more complicated today than it was then. But yeah, I think access to information and access to what's available, yes, absolutely easier today.
So you looked in the back of kind of these magazines to find jobs to apply for. Do you remember how many you applied for originally?
Out of graduate school, I'm gonna say 20. If I did a deep dive, I could probably find it somewhere on some 5 1/4 floppy disk that you've probably never seen. That was truly a floppy, not a 3.5. That's a hard shell floppy, but a 5 1/4 floppy. I'm going to say 20 or 25, because my training was in cognitive psychology, so I'm looking for cognitive psychology assistant professor positions around the United States. At that time, coming out, earned my PhD August of 1989. So that's, so I'm doing my search all of back into 88 into 1989. So yeah, probably 20, 25 applications.
And then walk us through a little bit about what that process was like once you applied. Did you go on multiple interviews? Was it easy to decide which job to choose?
Wow, you're an optimist because you think I had multiple options This is really flattering until I have to tell the story. And so, yeah, back then you mailed it off, and you either waited for a letter or a phone call. And I had um, two interviews. Uh, I don't want to. I had one interview where I went and had a very polite. I don't want to embarrass the school. I had a very polite interaction with the folks there. It was a really good experience for me, but it was clear that it wasn't a good match and fit, which is so important. Um, and they were very good to me, but there was a couple of awkward things that happened, which I'm not going to talk about because it wouldn't be prudent. But it was it was a good experience for me to have that interview because that got me ready for the next interview, which I went to the University of Wisconsin Platteville, and I was a much better match and fit, and that was where I landed my first job post-graduate school. And I was there for 3 years. And then I went back on the job market, and then I landed a job at Boise State, where I've been for the past 28 years.
And what brought you back onto the job market? Why'd you decide to look for another job?
Okay, all right. I'm going to tell you this story. I will. I will. I'm going to take a drink, and then I'm going to tell you this story. Okay. So I was doing. I thought I was working pretty well. I thought I was working really hard, and I think they would tell you that I was as well. See, that would have been right around early 90s, 91, 92, and really awesome people. I really liked being in Platteville. I liked that part of Wisconsin. I grew up in the Midwest, and so I was near my parents and at the time my wife's parents. My first daughter, my only daughter, my first child, was born in Platteville, Wisconsin. So I have really good memories of that place. But at the end of my second year, I got a letter, my annual evaluation letter from the dean of the college, Dean Dale Fatzinger, a very delightful man. And in this letter, he tells me how hard I'd worked and I'd done a good job. And he said that Eric, you had a really good year. Your teaching, research, and service exceeded expectations. And due to these achievements, your annual salary increase will be $283, something like that. Mm-hmm. That's not the exact amount. And again, I don't remember email at the time, so I must have called him, or the next time I saw him, I said, Dean Fatzinger, I think there's a typo in your letter. I think you're missing a zero, because you said I had a really good year, and you said I did all the right things. And $283, you meant $2,830, right? And he said, no, Eric, I'm so sorry. That's all the budget that we have. And I'd like to think I'm not that money driven or money oriented, but I'm a young professor. I'm married. I have a newborn child. If my salary increases are going to be $283 a year, that doesn't bode well for my future in higher ed. And so, to be honest with you, Brittany, that's what triggered me going on the job market. I was working really hard. I was being told I was doing everything well, and I just thought I've got to look for other options. I've got to look at other places in the country. Are they all as economically depressed as Wisconsin is? Is this an anomaly here? Can I do better for myself and my family if I'm going to work this hard? And so I went on the job market. I applied to 7 places that, in it would have been fall of 1991 into the spring of 92. I got invited to come out to Boise State and interview, and they offered me a job, and I took it. So been here ever since.
Great. And were there certain things about that interview that made you more inclined to take the job? Was it just for money, or were there other things that interested you?
The quality of life was really good. The the climate, the people in the department were outstanding. There was going to be a somewhat bump in pay from what my starting had been as a new assistant professor. I think I was going to get some credit for time served. Um, Again, the people at Platteville were delightful. I enjoyed them. I actually helped to co-found a conference at Platteville while I was there. Um, but economically, it just didn't look promising. In fact, I may get this detail not exactly right, but after I left Platteville, a couple years later, I believe they had 5 or 6 colleges, and then they contracted down to 3 as a budget saving move, which they could release some deans and release some staff, and they struggled, and so they were not on a good trajectory budget wise, and so and I'm not so sure money is always the best reason to move. It worked out okay for me in that spot. And I do think when people move in higher ed, you need to move earlier rather than later. I think when people keep bouncing over and over, it can be a problem and a red flag. I think I think that move there at year 3 was obviously I think it's okay for me. But I think if I had moved again after 3 more years at Boise State and moved again after 3 more years somewhere else, that starts to look funny. Like, why can't this guy stay for more than 3 years at any one place? I think 3 years after the first place is really super common. So anyway.
That's good to know. And so your move to Boise State, obviously you've been there for how long now?
20. I just finished my 28th year.
So obviously it was a good move for you and your family.
It was absolutely, and so no place is perfect, but it's a great place to raise kids. The climate is delightful. I mean, I grew up in the Midwest, and so I can actually go outside and not be attacked by mosquitoes here. We do have 4 seasons. We get a little bit of snow in the winter. When it's hot here, it's 90 degrees, but it's 14% humidity, so it's tolerable. The joke is it's a dry heat. You know, uh, we're not that big. I mean, Idahoans think, oh my God, the city of Boise has 200,000 people. And, anybody from a big city laughs at that because that's not big at all. So, I grew up halfway between Chicago and Milwaukee. Trust me, Boise's not that big, but people who grew up in Rexburg, think that Boise is huge. And so it's all about perspective.
Yeah, it's all relative. I thought I grew up in a small town, and now I've looked at it, and I think it's about 500,000 people. It's probably not as small as I thought.
Yeah, for most people, that's not a small town unless you grew up in Houston or Atlanta or Chicago or LA or, New York City. Yeah.
Yeah. You transitioned kind of from there. Was it difficult to move? I mean, not quite across the country, but to somewhere different and to live kind of away from your family for so long?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and so that clearly wasn't popular. Taking wife at the time and my daughter, who we were really close in terms of proximity to both my parents and her parents, and then going 1,600 miles to the west. Not a popular move family wise, but as people understand, you do what you do for careers, and luckily there's nonstop service Boise to Chicago still to this day. So when you got to do that, you can fly back, you can drive back. You always have to balance the good of career or careers against the importance of family, and that differs for different people. I think it also differs for where you are in the trajectory of both your career and your family. So if you have little ones, it might be more important. If you're single, it might be a different level of importance. If you're married with no children, it might be a different level of importance. Living close or living far. I don't know. I'm pretty sure there's not a one size fits all, but I don't think there's any generic advice that we can give about how that works. Um, when you live apart, that just means when you go home, it's a very special time to be able to spend with loved ones. And depending on health and finances, those loved ones can come out and visit with you in your natural environment. Um, I didn't make it home for a lot of Christmases once I moved to Boise, but I tried to go out either every other summer or every summer. So so it just kind of depends, and family dynamics are so complicated.
Yeah.
um, Sometimes moving away might actually improve the family dynamics and improve relationships because you're not around each other constantly all the time, depending again on prior situations and family dynamics. So
Yeah. And so what was the start of this career? So you've been an assistant professor for about 3 years. You just moved, so you're in your fourth year. Walk us through a little bit about what the beginning of your career teaching was like.
well, it's always hard starting somewhere because you're the new person, and so I was starting over in many ways. The good news was I knew how to do college teaching, and I knew how to do research. So the good news was I'd done college level teaching for 3 years and did some teaching in grad school as well. I established a program of research at Platteville, so I'd done research utilizing undergraduate research assistants as my RAs, and so I knew how to do that. Um, but going to a new place, you've got to figure out kind of the status quo and how do I fit in, and what's my role. And I remember at Boise State, to be honest with you, the hardest thing for me to learn was academic advising because everyone had an academic advising responsibility. And I remember struggling with, oh, I've got to learn this system because I don't want to mess up and tell somebody you got to take this class, and I just took them to take the wrong class, and now it's going to cost them a year because the catalog is the law, and if a faculty member makes a mistake, that doesn't mean that they get to make an exception. So that I remember that being the most stressful part of being a new faculty member at a new institution, even though I had experience somewhere else.
Yeah, advising is a little stressful in that way, especially the first few years. I know that that's in my role too.
Yeah, it's in some ways it's high stakes. I mean, it's students really rely on you, and some of the things that you talked about in your opening podcast. I mean, some of that's just advice that be reflective and think about what you want to do. There's no wrong path there.
Mhm.
Think about you talked about. I remember. Where do you want to work? Is that important? Where you want to work, or what venue, or you know, is it what part of the country? I mean, when you tell a student to think about that, there's nothing that can't go wrong. But if I tell a student, you don't have to take statistics before research methods, and I just made a mistake, then that becomes a high stakes mistake because
Yeah.
I might have just cost the student an extra year of undergraduate work and, you know, 14,000 more dollars because I just made a mistake. So,
Can you explain a little bit about how your career has changed over time? So you've had a healthy, long career there. How did it go transitioning from kind of early career to mid?
sure. Yeah. So I arrived Boise State in 1992, assistant professor. I become with the 3 years at Platteville with about three more years at Boise State. I become an associate professor in 1995. I become department chair in 1996. So I serve as department chair for 4 years, 1996 to 2000. And then I am placed on probation and parole in 2000. I stepped down from chair. I finished my term. And so I'm an associate professor from 95 forward. I don't know, maybe to around 2005 or so. I had to look at my CV and apply and become full professor. I do another gig as interim um, chair 2005, 2006. Someone stepped out a year early out of their term, so I stepped in and filled out the rest of their term. And then just last June of 2019, July 1st, July 1st, 2019, I became department chair for the third time. And in theory, that is a 3-year term that could be renewed once. But that really, Brittany, to answer your question, that's because I just kind of gave you a superficial answer. Um, until you get promotion and tenure, you're trying to crank on all 3 cylinders of teaching, research, and service. And so you want to be a great professor in the classroom. You want to earn high teaching evaluations. You want to nurture students. You want to prep your classes. You want to get as good as you can at them. At Boise State, my goal was to have 5 publications by the time I applied for promotion tenure, 2 with a Boise State byline, and at least 2 with the first authorship, which I did have by the time I applied in 1996. And then service was, not overly innovative or unique, service to the institution and service to the discipline. And so you document all that in a binder, and you go up, and that's that. And then you kind of do the same kind of thing again from associate to full, with a little bit higher stakes and a little bit higher expectation in that step from associate to full. The thing for me, which works for me and maybe me only, although I don't think it's unique, I double dipped, meaning I made my research program a research program about teaching. So rather than have try to become a really good teacher and then become a world-class researcher about, I don't know, cognitive dissonance, become a cognitive dissonance expert, I made my research about teaching and learning and college student success because I wanted to be a better advisor. I wanted to be a better teacher. So I kind of overlapped and did it that way. And that worked for me. And luckily, Boise State was a place that valued that and didn't put that in the penalty box. And so for me, that was probably the smartest decision I ever made. So I'm not sure that answers your question.
It definitely does. And then do you find that having your research program centered on teaching and learning, obviously that worked well at Boise State. You were saying maybe some other universities didn't approach that. Is there any advice you give to somebody who maybe wants to do that type of research about how to find a university that values that?
Yeah, I would do my due diligence and make sure that either where you're at or where you're trying to go from either the place you're there or a grad student, make sure that you talk to people who regularly serve or have access to that promotion and tenure committee, and make sure you understand the values of that institution. So at an R1, they may be more interested in people who do traditional bench science, and maybe they want someone who maybe their criterion might be, you've got to show us that you earned at least $5 million in grants before you apply for promotion and tenure. And if you do teaching and learning research, to accumulate that amount in 6 years is pretty rare. But if you're doing neuroscience, you might be able to do that, but you might have needed a startup of 100,000 or more. So I think making sure you know the institutional values as well as the departmental and college values is really critical, because I was fortunate that Boise State was a place when I got there that they did value my scholarship about teaching and learning and college student success as real and valid and meaningful. If they hadn't, I would have kept doing the stuff I did in graduate school. implicit and explicit memory and feeling of knowing and that stuff, which I did because I liked it, but my interest changed, and so I we all play the game that we have to play to earn the accolades and earn the credentials. And then after you get tenure, then hopefully maybe you earn a little bit more independence.
Thank you.
Sure.
And then I'll transition a little bit because you also have your own successful podcast, you and your co-host. How and when did you decide to start that in addition to your other duties that you're already doing in your job?
Sure. So first off, thank you for the compliment. And here, I'm going to give you another compliment. So I probably started thinking about a podcast in 2015 or 2016, but I knew that I wouldn't do it alone. I just wasn't going to figure out. I had an idea I wanted to do a podcast, but I didn't want to figure out all the technology piece, all the microphones and the recording and the getting of the guests and the recruiting them and the interviews. And so I knew I was interested in the idea, but I knew I didn't want to do it by myself. And so I actually talked to a friend of mine, Sue France, and I just mentioned it to her one time about, I'm interested in doing this, and I might start thinking about a format for it, but I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to do it. Just one of these things you see someone, one of your friends, and you're just chit-chatting at dinner when you're at a conference kind of thing. The compliment, by the way, to you is that you did not wait to find a co-host. You did not wait. You did not need someone else to rely on. Good for you. You did it by yourself. That's the compliment. Okay.
Thank you.
The story I've been told is that Sue had another conversation with someone else, maybe along the same timeline, who also mentioned to her, hey, I've been thinking about a podcast with teachers to talk about psychology stuff. And at the time at Highline College, that was her colleague, Garth Neufeld. And Garth is now at Cascadia College. And so Garth and I met in person in March of 2017 in Seattle, where he lives. We spent a day together and we wrote a PS grant and eventually got it. And then we launched Psych Sessions in 2017. And like you, we had to release 3 episodes to get launched in iTunes, which is now Apple Podcasts. And we will, on Tuesday, as we're recording this, we will release episode number 95. We release every other week. So in September, if all goes to plan, we will release episode 100. So it has been, and I think you and I chatted about this a couple months ago. It has been remarkably and surprisingly rewarding. You know, when you and I go to conferences and we find our buddies and we end up going to a dinner, and sometimes there's someone new there at the dinner that we've never met before, but they're a buddy of our buddies, and it's kind of fun to get to know someone. But these, as you're going to find out pretty quickly if you haven't already, these conversations, when you get an hour-ish to talk to someone, you really get a chance to find out stories that you've never heard. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've had these conversations on a podcast with some of the people who are my best friends, but I've never talked to them about what was their first major, or we often talk about origin stories. Did your parents expect you to go to college, or what did your parents do for a living? And sometimes there's just these amazing stories that people have to tell that I stumble on by accident. Anyway, the podcast has just become this thing in the mid to late part of my career that is this awesome gift. And we've started to now kind of spin it off with help. And so Marianne Lloyd at Seton Hall has her own little feature of it called Ask Psych Sessions. which is going to be it's her little piece of it that she's in charge of. And we're about to spin off another little piece of it where Anna Ropp from Metro State in Denver, she's going to interview people who do SOTL research as their research is coming out. And she's going to interview them and ask them to talk about, hey, this new piece of research is coming out. Tell us about what motivated. Tell us the backstory of your new research. So you're going to get these cutting edge scoops from the researchers in their own words. And so anyway, it's been a blast. It's been a blast.
That's exciting. I'm excited for those new spinoffs.
Yeah. And, I think we're only limited by our creativity. And Garth and I also realize we can't do it all. And so there's a ton of talented people out there, and we're just going to keep bringing them in as they agree to play in the same sandbox. So.
Well, they should. It's a lot of fun. I've been thrilled by how exciting it was to.
Are you really having fun?
It's a lot of fun. Yeah. I remember the first one I recorded, I came away with just such an incredible high. It was so much fun. I adored it. And just like you were saying, it was a friend that I went to my PhD program with. And not that I thought I knew her in and out, but I thought I knew her experience within that program pretty well because we were going through it at the same time. And I still learned so much new information that I had no idea.
Yeah, it's just, and it might have been that she told you some stories that you'd forgotten about, but they're just fun. I was going to say to get on tape, but to get recorded, they're just fun to get on. And Brittany, something that I don't like. I was trying to be funny, but I won't be. Your first podcasts, something I don't like about you. Your first podcasts are the best first podcasts I've ever listened to. So there's something very unfair about the level of professionalism that you have instantly jumped to right away. So Garth and I, when we met that day in March, I think, we actually did a sample recording. And when we first released in October, we released it. And it was like 45 minutes or so. And it was bad. And actually, I have the data from Libsyn, who is our provider. And 5 people actually downloaded it. But then we removed it and we replaced it with a new episode 1. So the episode 1 that shows up right now is not the original episode 1. It was so bad, we removed it and put in a new one, but 5 people have the original.
Now you're going to have to release it as like a special episode down the line.
It was so bad. And we were having fun with the notion that, we can swear. You can swear, and I'm not going to ruin your podcast by doing that. But we were saying effing this and effing that, just having fun, like little boys who had a microphone, and we could swear on a microphone. Oh, it's awful. The recording is. I might send it to you to listen to as an example of what not to do.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway. But you've had a lovely launch. It's been great to watch from afar.
Well, thank you again. Your advice really helped springboard it and get it a little bit faster. All that technology side you said you weren't super interested in. You gave me great advice to help streamline that process.
Well, yours looks super professional. It is super professional, and the logo is awesome, and the website and the auto calendar. Whew. It looks good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, we're about up to time. I just wanted to ask kind of one last question I like to ask. If you have any advice for somebody starting out in their career or wanting to figure out how to navigate their career, what kind of big major advice do you like to give people?
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't have anything unique to offer. It would be the same thing that you would tell people or career services people would tell others, is that you've got to keep networking. You have to keep talking to other people. Human connections are still valuable. even though everybody is posting on Indeed and Monster and all the search engines, you still hear about good jobs through people. You still have connections. You still need letters of recommendation and referees and references. Human contact and human touch and human everything is still just as important today. And so, um, even though we've been social distancing now for a couple of months and we may still be on and off, actually, I think for a couple of years, we may be doing this on and off, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think now more than ever, it's important, those little touches and those little the attention to detail around networking and talking to people is important. I teach a 100 level class on introducing people to the psychology major, and in that there's an informational interview assignment, and within that there's a mandatory, you must write a handwritten thank you note. And I actually have to give students instructions about a handwritten thank you note involves a paper, a pencil, an envelope, and writing the note. And when they show me their typed email, they have to do it over again because that's not a handwritten note. I mean, we never know really what's going to set our application and performance apart. So I think attention to detail is really critical. There are data out there that tell us that, and this is a little bit dated, it's 2007 data, that the number 3 reason that new collegiate hires were fired or disciplined was failure to follow instructions.
Wow.
So that, that ability to set yourself apart and follow instructions and it's really important. And so, again, that's not overly innovative advice to give. It's something that it's just so important.
But it's great advice. I still have students ask me every semester about that. I just had this last semester. I said, ask me any questions you want, kind of about careers, about anything. And number 1 was, do I still have to network? How do I do that? What do I need to learn in that realm? So I think students are still grappling with that. So it was great advice for them.
It's really double hard for introverts. It's really double hard for people that doesn't come natural to. And the hard part for introverts to accept is that, they've adapted so well in college. They may have taken a class online versus face to face because they could avoid, face to face contact. They could avoid working in groups face to face as opposed to working in groups online. And so, okay, in one hand, good for you. But unless your job is going to be completely online, at some point you have to develop that skill set and you have to develop that comfort. And so, the advice to introverts, which they hate, would be you have to lean into the thing that you're not good at.
Yes.
And you might as well do it in college, because in college, when you get an F, that's a soft place to land. In the workplace, when you get an F, you get fired. You lose your job, you lose your home, you lose your automobile. So you might as well learn how to figure these hard things out in college as opposed to in the workplace. And that's a hard thing to do. We don't want to do the things that we don't like doing. Unless someone forces us to do it.
Well, as an introvert who's still working on networking, I'll echo that. I really started in grad school, I think a little too late. I wish I would have done it a little bit more in undergraduate. I think that's one of my kind of regrets from that time. And now I set it as a specific goal. When I go to conferences, I make sure I introduce myself to people that I'm scared to, or that I ask a question. I have kind of specific goals of kind of getting myself out there. And then at the end of the day, I get to kind of retreat into my introvertedness, and I get to brag to my extroverted husband that I actually did something, and he thinks I'm crazy because for him that's Tuesday. Doing it in undergrad would be very beneficial.
And Brittany, good for you. And because I'm an introvert as well. And so when I go to a conference, the last thing I want to do is go around and talk to people. And sometimes I don't, but a lot of times I know that I need to.
Mhm.
And I think one of the things for you that's going to be so awesome is that this podcast is going to be your entree to that. And so this podcast is going to be, a great natural reason for you to go up and talk to people and talk about, have you heard about my career journey podcast? And you can have little cards made up as a square that have your logo on it. And you can have on the back, you can have the details about how to find it online. And this is going to be your perfect natural thing to be promoting yourself and your podcast, as well as a natural discussion point to be talking to people about. Um, it's I remember as a graduate student going to the Midwestern Psychological Association in Chicago every year. It's in the Palmer House, and I remember. All right, there's a reception. It's in the red lacquer room. I remember all the details, and I would go to it, and I would look for people that I know. I would look for researchers, and I would try to ask a question. I would try to go up to them, and this is not something I enjoy doing, but I would try to do it. I would make a round around the room, and then I would leave. And it's not my forte, but then you can say something like, you could write to them or email them and say, hey, I saw you at MPA. I know you were talking to Roddy Rodiger during the conversation hour. I didn't want to interrupt you, but I want to ask you this question about the serial position effect. Then you can make a connection that's real, even if maybe you didn't even talk to them. So to our students, we get it. We know you're introverts, but we had to do it, and sadly, so do you.
Well, I like that last piece of advice about even if you can't do it in person and you're still struggling, you can still do it through email. I know that's how I got my start, was reaching out to people maybe virtually, which seems a little less pressure.
Right. I mean, even a Zoom call. I mean, in the COVID-19 era, a Zoom call hopefully feels like a lot less pressure.
Yeah.
To do
You're all
something
getting
like
a little better at it.
Yeah. I just hope that, the notion of networking and connections, I just don't think is going to go away. And everything it feels to me very super competitive, whether it's graduate school, whether it's good jobs with your bachelor's degree, whether it's med school, dental school, law school, vet school. I mean, I've seen an uptick in our undergraduate majors who want to go to OT, occupational therapy. It
Yeah.
seems super popular, and maybe it's always been. I haven't paid attention. I can't figure this out. But
Yeah, no, I've noticed that uptick recently too.
yeah, so getting comfortable talking to people who you don't know is an important skill, and that small talk piece, even though introverts tend to hate it, that having that elevator pitch, those are
Yeah.
all really important ideas.
Well, great. Thank you so much. That was great advice. And thank you for sharing your story with us.
Brittany, I'm happy to do it. Congratulations on the podcast and on the launch. And if I can be helpful in the future, I'd be happy to. And I will keep listening to the episodes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. Head over to our website at careerjourneypodcast.com for more info, the latest episodes, and to join the discussion about careers. See you next time.